let's move on to the next story here. So our final story tonight, Glenn Greenwald and Ben Shapiro. So I'm going to go ahead and fast forward just a little bit here. Right. So as you can imagine, Glenn Greenwald obviously has quite a bit of criticism for Ben Shapiro's take in reference to Israel and Gaza. Ben Shapiro is a Zionist. He approves of the war. He said some very nasty things. As you guys know, before we covered this, where him and Candace Owens actually clashed when it came to this particular war, because for Candace Owens, she said, well, I'm against genocide anywhere, and I'm against the U.S. funding these wars abroad. So she has been consistent, whereas Ben Shapiro may have had criticisms with some of the other conflicts that the U.S. was funding. But when it comes to, of course, the state of Israel, he is totally fine with the U.S. giving funding to Israel and Israel bombing Gaza. Let's go ahead and get into this, because now Ben Shapiro is also trying to defend Biden bombing Yemen. Let's get into it.
So here's Ben Shapiro. I think it's worth going through a few excerpts of what he said, again, in defense of the Biden administration's decision to launch a new war against one of Israel's enemies.
So last night, CENTCOM, as well as a bunch of other foreign countries, part of an American alliance, struck at targets in Yemen. They struck the Houthis. The Houthis are a ragtag group of terrorists who have taken over a large swath of Yemen after a massive civil war between the Houthis and the Saudis over control of the country. The Iranians have been funding the Houthis for years and years and years. And we'll get into the history of what exactly happened with the Houthis. Suffice it to say, the reason that all of this is happening right now is because the Houthis decided that they were going to try to act as an Iranian proxy arm and generate support for Iran by attacking Israel, and then by more largely attacking shipping in the Red Sea. Now, shooting off a few rockets or missiles at Israel that get down by American ships or by the Saudis, that really didn't have much of an impact on world opinion or on the world at large. But attacking ships in the Red Sea absolutely does.
Okay, he's exactly right. He's seeing the world through the Israeli perspective. He's saying the motive of the Yemenis is to strike back at Israel as punishment for what they're doing in Gaza. So the question yet again becomes, how is that an American war? The Yemenis haven't killed anybody. They haven't sunk any American ships. They have been trying to impede the flow of commercial travel through the Red Sea by some countries that they perceive as being responsible for the Israeli war in Gaza. But why does this mean that the United States now has to go to war because the Houthis are angry about what the Israelis are doing?
Exactly. What does this have to do with us? I mean, it just, at this point, it just is what it is, you guys. If you think about it, like, really, what does this have to do with us? The Red Sea, it's their waters. It's their waters. Like, they have a right to stand up and say, we don't want this coming across our water. And let's remember, the Houthis are actually trying to prevent the genocide. They want it to stop. And we have people out there that are more upset with the Houthis for trying to stop a genocide of people than they are with the people actually committing the genocide. It really makes no sense. I've said this before. Yemen, a very poor country, heavily sanctioned by the United States government. You have children starving in Yemen, a very, very poor country. And you have the United States government trying to continue to destroy this country. Once again.
This is something we talked about from the start, that the cost that the United States was incurring in order to defend this foreign country yet again is not just measured in the billions of dollars that we're going to spend to transfer to the Israelis, nor in the already depleted stockpiles we're going to use to transfer the weapons to them that they're using, as everyone knows, to destroy Yemen. Whenever there's a video of babies that are killed or children being operated on without anesthesia broadcast to the entire world, everybody knows that it was American weapons that did that, and that bears a real cost. But the biggest cost is the danger that we're going to now have the Ben Shapiros of the world demanding and now getting and now celebrating the deployment of American troops in an actual fighting war, in a shooting war against other Israeli enemies in the Middle East. That's what we have, and that explanation of his makes clear that that is actually the dynamic that he is happy about. Let's watch a couple other extras.
See, notice that's what Glenn is saying. Like, Ben is happy about this. And I never understood why anyone would be happy about war. That was just always kind of weird to me.
Terps.
The prior year. Well, all of this drove last night an allied attack on certain resources in Yemen controlled by the Houthis. It was a telegraphed punch, meaning this entire exercise was designed to deter the Houthis, not designed to actually kill or destabilize the Houthis, who in fact, as we say, are a terrorist group that governs a large swath part of Yemen. The reason to telegraph the attack is to allow Iranians to get their military forces out of the way so as not to provoke some sort of escalation with Iran more directly, because of course Iran has lots of forces on the ground helping out the Houthis in Yemen.
Now, obviously, needless to say, anybody who dislikes Israel or who fights against Israel is a terrorist. That's pretty much the definition at this point. Any group that defies the orders of the United States or Israel is a terrorist organization.
Meanwhile, Israel is the country that has been terrorizing Palestinian people since 1948. We're not allowed to call them terrorists. This is really what it's come down to, guys. If you disagree with the state of Israel, you're a terrorist. Look at what they said about the pro-Palestinian protesters.
And even though the Houthis are now running and governing Yemen, Ben Shapiro wants to call them a terrorist organization. But as he just said, it was a campaign that we had telegraphed for many weeks. It was something that was very well planned. Everybody knew it was coming. And that begs the question that we raised in the first segment of why the Biden administration could not simply have gone to Congress to debate whether or not it was time to go start a new war, risk a new war, in order to fight against one of Israel's enemies in the Middle East. It should have been openly debated and then voted on in Congress for exactly the reason Ben Shapiro just said. There was no emergency there. It didn't pop out of nowhere. The opposite was true. It was very deliberate, and we had weeks to plan it and threaten it, which means we had ample time to have gone to Congress to debate it and to seek its authorization.
A blow. The Houthis, of course, say they're not going to be deterred because the way this works in the Middle East is that you have basically terrorist groups that provoke a response from an overwhelming power. They get their asses absolutely kicked, and then they claim that just because they survived, they won. That's what's.
I don't see them getting their butts kicked, though. I don't see the Houthis getting their butts kicked. I don't see Hamas getting their butts kicked. So I don't even know where this statement is coming from. Somebody tell me if I'm wrong. If you've seen something differently, let me know. But based on what I have been reading, which is pretty much almost every day, keeping up with these conflicts, I don't see the Houthis getting their butts kicked, and I haven't seen Hamas getting their butts kicked. So I don't know.
Currently going on in the Gaza Strip, Hamas provokes a gigantic Israeli military response, the largest Israeli military response to any attack since 1973. And they get their asses absolutely handed to them, and most of their fighters killed, and most of their leadership killed. And then, if they are breathing at the end of it, they claim victory. The Houthis are playing the same game. It's really, honestly, cowardly sort of stuff. Nasser al-Din Amir, a Houthi...
It's cowardly stuff. He's sitting in the studio making millions of dollars a year, maybe millions of dollars a month, to cheer the deployment of American troops in that region to defend this foreign country that he acknowledges he has a great deal of loyalty to and love for. The Houthis are confronting the most powerful military in the world and are saying they're going to continue to do it because of the cause that they believe in, which is trying to impose some cost on Israel and the United States for killing an enormous number of civilians in Gaza and destroying civilian Palestinian life. Now, whatever else you want to say about the Houthis, what they are doing is not cowardly. Cowardly is sitting in a studio sending other people to war for your pleasure or for your agenda. That's cowardly.
So there's a little call out there from Glenn to Ben, because he's right. I don't know if everyone is aware of that, but like These people, like some of them with the Daily Wire, Ben probably makes the most. He's making like millions of dollars. And Glenn is right, probably a million a month. And it's why it's always funny to me when people say, oh, you guys are grifters. Sabby's a grifter. RBN's a grifter. I'm like, what are we grifting? You don't see me making millions of dollars a month. You don't see me sitting in the damn studio. I've had the same background since day one. So it's just, yeah. Ben's getting paid to say these things. Now, I think Ben still believes these things, but Ben is being paid to say, yeah, you guys go fight in this war. And while he just sits there in a cozy studio.
Spending your whole life demanding more and more wars that you and your family never go fight. That's cowardly. Cowardly is not what the Houthis are doing, whatever else you might want to think about them.
The official told the Wall Street Journal, this is a brutal aggression. I love this. It's a brutal aggression. Dean Amir, a Houthi official, told the Wall Street Journal, this is a brutal aggression. I love this. It's a brutal aggression. Honest to God. If America and its allies wanted to commit, quote unquote, brutal aggression against the Houthis, this guy would not be alive to talk about it. Say they will undoubtedly pay its price. We will not waver in our stance to support the Palestinian people, regardless of the cost. After the coalition strikes, the U.S. had not seen any direct retaliatory action directed toward U.S. or other coalition members in the Red Sea. And again, the strikes came with a lot of warning. 1 week ago, the U.S., Britain, key allies issued an ultimatum saying stop it, and then they didn't stop it. And then on New Year's Day, Biden convened his national security team to discuss the options. And then, despite the coalition warning, the Houthis fired an anti-ship ballistic missile that fell into the water within sight of a commercial vessel. Now, the Houthis knew that the United States and its allies were going to strike all of these targets, and so they had relocated some of their weapons and equipment and fortified others. The question is whether this is going to deter further action from the Houthis. The answer is probably not. When you telegraph punches like this, it is very unlikely that that is going to convince the Houthis to stop what they are doing.
No, I agree with him there, too. This is very...
So one thing I appreciate about Glenn is like he's pointing out areas where he does agree with him, but he's also pointing out some inconsistencies from Ben Shapiro as well.
Unlikely to be the end of this escalation. This war is likely to go on, which means we have a new Middle East war. The question is for how long it will go on, for how many more exchanges of violence will it entail, how many people will be killed, how much retaliation will there be. Ben Shapiro seems extremely unbothered by those questions. Ones that should have been debated in Congress that we should still be debating now, because what he wants is what he has. That's why he's so happy. Namely, the exploitation of the most powerful military in the world in defense of this foreign country and its deployment against its enemies.
I'm sorry. This is very funny. Greg Bruce says wet ass P word. I still remember that. Oh my God, I'm sorry.
But if you're somebody looking at it from an American perspective, those are to be of great concern to you. He's saying this is almost certainly not the end of it, just the beginning. Which means we've now bought ourselves another Middle East war of exactly the kind that Joe Biden, when running, said he would not give the United States because nobody else wants these Middle East wars. Let's look at the last excerpt before we go to freezing cold, devastatingly cold Iowa and speak to Michael Tracy, who we sent there.
Yeah, so this is something I'm glad he brought that up. That remember, Joe Biden did make that promise that we would not have another Middle East war under his presidency. And yet here we are again. Like, it's just been a disaster. The war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, and now the war with Yemen. All this under Joe Biden.
Supply chain prices. And so it's very important that the West did something about this, just on a practical level. Now, on the moral level, the Houthis are some of the worst people on planet Earth. A legitimately evil, awful group. So the Houthis are an Iranian proxy group. Iran, as we've explained, is a terror sponsor. It has its tentacles all over the Middle East. It has its tentacles in Iraq, obviously, where they've had significant...
I have to laugh so much. I mean, I really laugh. Like, I find it darkly funny when people like Ben Shapiro complain, in general, that Iran has all of its tentacles in the Middle East. Nobody has more tentacles in the Middle East than the United States. At least Iran actually is in that region.
Yep.
The United States is on the opposite side of the world. The United States has not just tentacles, but military bases and control over multiple Arab states. We fund these Arab dictators, like the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Egyptians and the Jordanians and the Qataris,
Yep.
in order to do our bidding. And we're actually there fighting as usual. You have to go back to the 1970s to find a decade in which the United States did not bomb Iraq, just Iraq. And you notice there that Ben Shapiro is complaining that the Iranians have their tentacles in Iraq, a country that he cheered on as the United States went and packed up its military over across the world to invade and then occupy it for the next 15 years. But those kind of hypocrisies, those kinds of discrepancies don't enter his mind because he's looking at the world from a very self-centered, self-interested perspective.
And a very narrow view of the world. I never understood how people can listen to Ben Shapiro for quite a long time. And I always ask myself, like, I wonder how his wife deals with hearing that voice all the time. Like, that voice would drive me. This is why I don't cover like Ben Shapiro much on here, because that voice, it's a lot for me to take in. And I don't get it, dude. I don't get it. It's really weird.
Secondarily, the American perspective, primarily the Israeli perspective. And so if you look at it from those interests in that order, then you're going to see the American involvement and control of the Middle East is something that we need more of. Whereas somehow it makes the Iranians the most evil people in the world, that they're trying to exert influence, counter-influence in their region.
And notice that every country in that area apparently is evil, except for the state of Israel. Every country in that area has been called a terrorist, or these are really bad people, as Ben Shapiro just said, except for Israel.
Significant impact on the government of Iraq. They have their tentacles in Syria, where they're allied with Bashar Assad. They have their tentacles in Lebanon, where they effectively control the government via Hezbollah. They have their tentacles in Hamas. They have their tentacles in Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And they have their tentacles with the Houthis. Those tentacles are all over the Middle East. Now, one of the big problems that Iran historically has had is that Iran is Shia, and a huge percentage of the Middle East is Sunni. And because of that, there is not a lot of solidarity between the Shia and the Sunni. I mean, the reality is that whatever the hatred is for the Jewish state in the Middle East, the hatred for Israel, that's mostly a sideshow between the ongoing wars that have been happening between Shia and Sunni over the course of the past several decades. Multiple more Arabs and Persians have been killed in a variety of wars since the 1980s.
Oh, now all of a sudden you pretend to care about those people? Okay.
Anything that's happened with regard to the Jews. And all the hatred of the Jews does is it allows for the possibility of some sort of cross-cultural communication between Shia and Sunni in the Middle East. And that's what the Houthis are trying to do right now. They're trying to rally support to the Iranian side in any sort of Shia-Sunni conflict by siding with the Palestinians. Because one of the things that's happened is that the Palestinians, being an incredibly radicalized population that literally no Arab state will take in, not only will no Arab state take in the Palestinians, Arab states have expelled the Palestinians before. In the aftermath of the Gulf War, 200 to 300,000 Palestinians were expelled from Kuwait because they sided with Saddam Hussein in his war against Kuwait.
Let me pause here for a second. This was the part that really drove me crazy. So here has been Shapiro basically expanding that narrative that no one wants to take in the Palestinian people. And I want to clear that up because I'm tired of people making that statement. It's not that countries like Egypt or whatever don't want the Palestinian people there. It's that they know what Israel is trying to do. Israel's trying to remove the Palestinian people and then forbid them the right to return. So let's stop it. By the way, make up your mind, because one minute I'm hearing the Palestinian people are more conservative, the next minute I'm hearing they're radical. So make up your mind, Ben, because I've heard both. You see, this is all over the place. Excuse me. The other piece that he said here about Saddam Hussein, they sided with Saddam Hussein in reference to the war in Kuwait and yada, yada. So I've talked about the Saddam Hussein issue on the show multiple times, and people like Ben Shapiro should have gotten this right by now. It was a mistake for the U.S. government to go in and overthrow Saddam Hussein. Overthrowing Saddam Hussein for weapons of mass destruction, which he did not have at that point. All that did was open the door for ISIS to emerge. This is what happens when you go into other countries and you overthrow their leaders, thinking you're doing something that you know nothing really about. Saddam Hussein, while there's many criticisms that you can have of him, he was able to actually keep those types of groups in check and prevented those types of groups from coming into power. But when the US government came in and overthrew him, these are the things that people don't really understand. When you do the research, you read about this, you'll understand why Saddam Hussein was the way that he was. It's like in some ways he had to be that way to keep those groups in check. Now, I don't agree with everything that he did, but Ben Shapiro here is making it seem like that was a bad thing for Palestinian people to do. Ben Shapiro doesn't live in the region. The Palestinian people there live in the region. Obviously, they knew something that you did not. Meanwhile, you were sitting up here believing the lies from our government telling us that they had to take him out because he had weapons of mass destruction. The war in Iraq was a lie. Let's continue.
First Gulf War. So none of the Arab states are interested in taking in the Palestinian population. And so the Hamasniks went over to Iran and they worked a deal where Iran became one of their chief suppliers. And it turns out that the Sunni states, they have no interest in working with the Palestinians. Again, very radicalized population that destabilized virtually every regime they've come into contact with. By the way, this is why you're seeing Jordan right now issuing these very loud statements, because they are deeply afraid of their own population. 70% of Jordan is Palestinian, and they are afraid.
So let me just say to you.
Pause here for a second. So the Queen of Jordan is Palestinian. So there's that. You know, you're better off just talking to people in Jordan to get their perspective. Two, the statement that he continues to make when he says the other countries don't want Palestinian people there. This is why it's dangerous to make that statement. If you go back and you look through history, there was a time when that happened to Jewish people too. So what's the reason for that, Ben? You see, when he makes that statement, RFK Jr. has made that statement, Ron DeSantis has made that statement. But if you look through history, Jewish people went through this as well, where countries didn't want to take them in. This is why, remember when we go back and we look at the letter from Lord Rothschild, when he said that we are going to establish a state for the Jewish people, a place where Jewish people can be safe. At one point, they were looking at Uganda. Then eventually he decided they settled on Palestine. But there was already people there, the Palestinian people, right? So let's just remember that Jewish people went through this same thing where other countries didn't want to take them in either. So that's a dangerous, and this is why I've said this before. They make these statements, Zionists, some of the things that they say that they will point to and say that it applies to the Palestinian people or it applies to Hamas. A lot of times it applies to them. We'll finish with this part here.
Things here before we listen to this last part, which is, first of all, I hear this claim now all the time. And it's supposed to make you think that the Palestinians are subhuman and undesirable, that even Arab states don't want to take in the Palestinians. Now, first of all, one of the reasons why states like Egypt don't want to take in the Palestinians is because they don't want to help Israel in what is their stated goal in this war, which is to ethnically cleanse Gaza by transferring all of the Arabs and Palestinians out of there by putting them into other countries and then taking control of Gaza. But the other part of it is that when he says Arab countries don't want this, what he means are Arab dictators, U.S.-supported, U.S.-implemented Arab dictators who are there precisely to suppress the actual sentiments of the population. Like he just said, 70% or 80% of Jordanians want their government not to be an American puppet, but want them to be on the side of Palestine, because there's a huge Palestinian portion of Jordan, of the Jordanian population, who is Palestinian. That's why we have a king, a ruling family that we protect and pay for to keep that population's sentiments from being expressed. Same as in Egypt, same as in Saudi Arabia. So when they say, oh, even Arab states, what they mean are even the dictators that we control. But the most offensive part of this idea that, oh, well, obviously the Palestinians are bad people because no one wants to take them as refugees, is that after World War II, there were millions of Jewish refugees who survived the Holocaust in Europe. And no country wanted to take them. There were ships that came.
See, Ben knows. Not Ben, excuse me, Glenn knows. This is what I was talking about. So remember that, guys, when you hear that talking point from people, from the Zionists, that none of these countries want to take the Palestinian people in, remember that talking point I told you about. It's a dangerous statement because that can apply for Jewish people as well. That's the thing. And another point that Glenn brought up about the U.S. government, these are leaders that the U.S. government has actually hand selected, or they've actually put in charge. So a lot of times you have leaders in these countries, but again, because of the U.S. regime changes, these leaders are actually the ones that the U.S. government has hand selected, and they're there to do the U.S. bidding. So if the U.S. government doesn't want certain things to happen in that country, it's not uncommon for those leaders that the U.S. government selected to agree with them. So that's just something that we do have to realize.
The United States that FDR turned away during the war. And a lot of them ended up having to go back to Europe and dying as a result. The U.S. wouldn't take any Jewish refugees. And then after the war, the European Jews stayed for at least 2 years in horrific refugee camps that a lot of them said were as bad as the concentration camps from which they were liberated, except for the fact that they just didn't get killed. But other than that, it was the same kind of treatment. They were in fenced-in conditions that were horrible in nature because no state would take would take European Jews as refugees. So if the fact that no Arab state wants to take in Palestinians as refugees tells us something about the character of the Palestinians, which is the point of this argument, to make you think that. What did it say about the character of Jews and European Jews that no one wanted to take them, if you apply that same reasoning?
And that's why that statement is incredibly dangerous, because you can flip it around and apply it to other groups. And other groups wouldn't like it when you flip it around and you apply it to them. Glenn gets it. So and I'm surprised more people haven't said this back to Ben Shapiro. And it could just be because he's not willing to have the debate with them. I know other people have reached out. I know Norm Finkelstein reached out for a debate in reference to this particular issue. I think Ben has been ducking that. But I don't know, man. It's just something that really makes you think. But just because people are saying no to letting them in, that doesn't mean that they're bad people. And that's exactly what people like Ben are trying to imply. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Lisa. Why doesn't Ben's hair color and eyebrow color match his beard? Is he darkening his hair to look like an indigenous Palestinian? I think he's trying to look Arab. Is the beard real? It doesn't look real. Hold on. Let me see. Let me ask a guy in the chat. Dudes in the chat. The beard doesn't look. Is it real? You know what? It looks like maybe he dyed his hair and maybe he dyed his eyebrows. Because sometimes guys can have like their beard is like a lighter color, but their hair on the top of their head is not. Can I get a close up here? Now I'm curious. We'll have to get one where Glenn's out of the picture. Oh, they don't get too close on him. Oh, here we go. Does it look real to you guys? Oh, now it's spinning. I have to take it back out. Oh, balls. Okay, there it is. Does that look real to you guys? It looks like the beard is not real. I don't know, I'm not a dude, so I don't. Oh, Be Easy said it's an AI generated beard. It just doesn't look real. I don't know. It looks like Gamer said, nah, it's fake. DT says looks like a hair piece. Interesting. But V said he's got strange studio lighting and angle. Okay, maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. Nick said the beard is real. The Judaism is fake. Damn, Nick. Yeah. Oh, Sean says it's a 5 o'clock shadow. Okay. Okay. That would make sense, Sean. Really interesting. Oh, wow. That's an interesting point. Thank you. Okay, Denver. USA is pushing everyone away. Israel will not be geographically isolated and will be part of the Eurasian trade bloc. What about USA? That's a good point. Charlie Mack says RBN grifting by giving out food and clothes to the poor. I know, right? Thank you for the super chat, Unemployed. Have you seen the video of the Yemen war chant, "We don't care"? The people of Yemen have fought for 9 years and are utterly fearless. Yes, I have seen it. Thank you for this as well, Unemployed Scholar. Shias and Sunnis have set aside their differences. Thank you for that. And thank you, Do All Things with Love. The whole Sunni-Shia rivalry is also an invention of the CIA and Mossad. Just like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, ISIS equals Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. Well, thank you, Do All Things with Love. Thank you for that.